Picking up on that previous video about the serous membranes, how they form during development, and how they end up wrapped around your organs. Um, that is what forms most of the pericardium, or the sac that's around the heart, the pericardial sac. So you'll notice two of the layers are those serous membranes, the visceral layer that adheres very tightly to the heart, and the parietal layer. So in this diagram here, just to clarify, this is like a very superior part of the heart. And they've zoomed in here, and you can see this is the layer, the visceral layer, that's adhered very tightly to the heart. And then this is the parietal layer here, that is like the more superficial layer. And in between them is a pericardial cavity filled with serous fluid. And your book here is illustrated as if it's a reasonably large space. There really isn't a lot of space in there. It's just a thin film of fluid that allows the heart to move freely and not rub up against other organs next door. The pericardium also includes an extra layer besides the two serous membranes, which is around like all of the organs in your thorax and a lot of them in your abdomen as well. There's also this third outermost layer, or most superficial layer, this fibrous pericardium, which is rather thick. So you can see right here, that's fibrous pericardium. And it's just tough collagen tissue that protects the heart. So the sac around the heart actually has more than just the two layers of serous membrane. It also has that fibrous, most superficial layer. Okay, so the heart wall. Now the heart is a hollow organ, as you probably noticed, because there's chambers that you've already learned in lab. So those empty chambers, well, they're filled with blood, but those chambers make it a hollow organ. So there's a wall around each of these chambers, and this is the structure of the wall. There's three layers. The outermost layer, or the most superficial layer around the heart, is called the epicardium. So epi meaning on top of. And that is actually the same structure as the visceral layer of serous pericardium. So the deepest layer of the heart sac is the exact same thing as the most superficial layer of the heart wall. Because anatomists, that's how they sorted it out. So if you can imagine here, we just looked at the three layers of pericardium here. There's the visceral layer and the parietal layer and then the fibrous layer here. And then the heart wall, this layer is doing double duty. It's part of the heart wall as well, along with two other layers. So myo, hopefully you're thinking muscle. So this is the muscle layer. This would be the thickest layer right here. That's all the cardiac muscle tissue. And then finally, the endocardium, or the innermost layer. So the endocardium, what I really want you to focus on is the endothelium, which is the epithelial tissue that lines actually all of your circulatory system, not just your heart. So I actually learned it in the blood-brain barrier back in Unit 3. You've got this simple squamous epithelium, and that's the basement membrane. And it doesn't just form part of the endocardium, or the lining of the heart. It also is the epithelial tissue that lines all of your blood vessels as well. So basically the entire circulatory system is lined with this simple squamous epithelium that we call endothelium. The heart is a hollow organ. It has some rooms inside. And I'm going to draw a not so terribly anatomically correct version of those rooms. I'm going to add some entrances and exits. There's one room. And then it's going to lead to, there's another room down here. I'm going to draw like this. Make a little entrance there. And then we're going to make that go up there. So of course this looks just like a heart, doesn't it? Just what you thought it looked like. Hearts don't look like Valentine hearts. So I'm trying to be accurate. Not really. This is a schematic, a representation. And I will go over all these little entrances and exits and such. It's not terrible. Okay, so now to tell you what all these things are. The top rooms here, or chambers, those are the atria. This side would be the right atria. By the way, if I haven't mentioned it before, R, standard abbreviation for right. L, standard abbreviation for left. And in the case of the heart, you need to add the right and lefts where appropriate. This over here is the left atria. And notice that right, left is not your right and left. You're going to have to switch it to be the patient's, so to speak, right and left. So if you have difficulty with right and left, this is just going to make it that much harder. Oddly enough, I'm fine in anatomy, but everywhere else in the world, I can't, drive a car using someone else's directions because I can't get the right and the left straight. Oops, look what I just did. Let's try just get rid of that boo-boo. This is the right, and the lower chambers are called ventricles. Well, just ventricle. Right ventricle. And here is our left ventricle. Okay, so we've got our chambers down. We've got our rooms. Not so bad. Now we need all the entrances and exits. Those are the major blood vessels, sometimes called the great vessels. So into the right atria, you have two major vessels. You actually have a third that's small, we're not going to learn, but two major vessels that bring blood into the right atria. And okay, hopefully you remember, veins go to the heart. So these would be veins, these two. And their names are, this one here is the superior, which I'm going to abbreviate, superior vena cava, or cava. I usually say cava. And this is all of the used up blood, the deoxygenated, lacking nutrients, all of this blood from the upper body. And this is the inferior vena cava. So this is all of the used up blood from the lower part of the body. So the inferior and superior vena cava. Then the blood would go into the right ventricle. And then the right ventricle would pump it out to this vessel. And this vessel here is, well, I'm going to write it up here. Pulmonary trunk is this portion right here. Now the pulmonary trunk, and actually the word trunk, let's just pause for a minute. We're going to see trunk occasionally when we talk about blood vessels. That means it's really short vessel and it will branch very soon. So we'll see a couple trunks when we look at blood vessels throughout the body. So this is actually, it's shorter than I drew it here to scale. So this pulmonary trunk, not very long, and immediately branches right and left. In the case of the pulmonary trunk, it branches into the right and the left pulmonary arteries because they're going away from the heart. So the blood would go right and left. And it's going to pulmonary, lungs. You remember the pulmonary circulation? So this blood is going to be pumped to the right and left lungs. Great. So it goes to the lungs, picks up some oxygen, drops off some carbon dioxide, and then it's going to return to the heart. And it comes through, I'm going to make that blue, these vessels. There's two on each side. And into the left atria. And those vessels are called pulmonary veins. And specifically, this side would be the left pulmonary veins. There's two of them. These over here, I'm not going to label, but these would be the right pulmonary veins. Okay, great. Then the blood, of course, would go pumped into the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle it gets pumped out here and over this arch. This vessel makes a big arch. This is the aorta. It's a giant artery. And it does go up a little bit and then arch, and we call those different parts different names, but for now we'll just do aorta coming out of the left ventricle. And this is an artery, and it's carrying blood to the entire body, oxygenated blood. So I want to point out a couple things that you cannot see here. The colors. So in your book, and we'll see this in a minute, this aorta would be red, and so are these veins, because they're oxygenated blood, right? And over on the other side, yes, these would be deoxygenated blue veins. And this one would also be blue. This artery would also be blue. So we got to watch the colors of the pulmonary things, like pulmonary arteries here are blue, pulmonary veins here are red. Another quick thing to note, adding abbreviations. So always add a V or an A, except in certain special cases like the vena cavas. You don't have to add a V. The aorta, you don't have to add an A. The trunk, you don't have to add an A, but everywhere else you should have that. You should have a V or you should have an A, as in these pulmonary arteries. Actually, the only vessel, well, there are a few others, but most of the vessels where you don't need an A or a V are going in and out of the heart. Most of them. Those are the rare ones. So we'll get to vessels in chapter 23, and I'll remind you of that. Okay, now I wanted to add some valves, but that's not a good idea right now. It's a little busy. We will come back to this.